Hello, and thank you so much for being here for yet another genealogy quick start. We are very excited to have not one, but two special guests today. Before I even tell you who they are, you should know who they are. Please subscribe to our newsletter. We don't send a whole bunch, we just want to make sure you know who our next special guests are. But back to our special guests, we are excited to have two returnees. So they're going to be special guests. We have Annette Unrau. She is going to be here with Michael Strauss. And if we're going to have military, we're going to have real military people here. And we are really happy to have Michael and Annette back here with us today. Of course, you know you can watch Genealogy Quick Start on Facebook, YouTube, and of course, our studio home at PhillyCam. Let me tell you about our episodes today. Jim and Michael always come up with great quick starts, and today it's called Citizenship Naturally. A lot of people are, trying to find those immigration records, and sometimes we forget about the naturalization records, and those are very important, but they can be a little tricky figuring out where to get them, who actually needed to fill out naturalization forms. Jim and Michael are going to demystify that for you today. And we have Annette and Michael will be talking about unique collections for World War I and World War II. Yes, we've all heard about that great fire that happened in St. Louis, which caused damage to these records, but never doubt that genealogists know where to find the records. So we look forward to hearing about those World War I and World War II ancestors records. So let me bring out my buddies, columnist and editor, James M. Beidler. Hello, Jim.
Hello.
And also Michael John Neill, genealogy tip of the day. And I forgot to please ask you to tell us where you are and your genealogy group, because there may be some genealogy souls out there that need savings. Please let us know where you are. So Jim and Michael, we have Michael and Annette talking about military records, specifically World War One and World War II. I sound like a third grader. Whoa. Uh, but do you have any favorite military ancestors or cool military ancestor finds?
Well, my most favorite one is from War of 1812, where it appears my fourth great grandfather was impersonated by his son, who is not my third great grandfather. That's one of his sisters, to try to get the old man's pension. Uh, and I tried to go into the Society of the War of 1812 on this guy, and until I read the whole pension file, I realized this is going to go nowhere. So then I went to a different line. But yeah, but John Kramer, I'd still like to wring your neck. So
Boo, John Kramer, boo. Michael, you have any favorite ancestors in the military?
Well, I've got several. One that comes to mind is, since Jim mentioned War of 1812, we'll kind of stick with that theme. And I've got a couple War of 1812 ancestors. One, his horse was requisitioned during the war, and later he filed a claim for reimbursement. And I've got a copy of the claim that he filed for reimbursement after the war was over. So that's kind of neat. He was also a bigamist, and he maybe murdered somebody later, but that's a whole separate issue with good old Rufus. I descend from the second illegal wife. I come from the illegal marriage, so
I think you kind of buried the lead on that.
I
That
did.
one, Michael.
We like to do that. We like to do that.
So you have your own quick start here today. And I love talking about these immigration type documents, but you are talking about, and this is a cool title, Jim, of course, Citizenship Naturally. So tell us what you're going to be quick starting today.
Yeah, well, of course, naturalization is the process of becoming an American citizen, someone who was not born into that citizenship. The rules have changed over the years. There are colonial naturalizations that at that time would apply to anyone coming here who wasn't from the British Isles because they were a citizen on both sides of the water, and it's kind of a bit of a backdoor immigration record because usually, I don't want to say usually, a lot of times the facts of their immigration, even sometimes the name of the ship, the arrival date, things like that, work their way into the naturalization records.
Fantastic. So are you ready to get started with Citizenship Naturally? I think they're like, yeah, what are we here for? All right, let's
What's our alternative?
all right. So step one would be to determine an ancestor who naturalized. So, what's the easy way to do that?
The first thing is, it is a particular person, an immigrant, and then you may, I might be jumping ahead here, but you may have to determine the laws at the time. Like if somebody came as a child, there's sometimes that they had to naturalize independently, and other times that a father naturalizing would cover them. So kind of, any immigrant was a potential person to naturalize, but not all of them did for various circumstances.
Particularly if they saw no reason to vote, because without getting political, one of the main reasons for naturalizing is to be able to vote. And some, if that wasn't important to them and they just wanted to come over here to make money or get out of wherever, and they might have seen no reason to naturalize. If we've got individuals that naturalize a little or came over a little bit later, there may be some census records that give a clue as to whether or not they naturalize. So depending upon the time period, that may lead you into a suggest that record, or it may not if your people were here earlier than that.
And how accurate would you say census birth locations are? If they say, it's Ireland, is it probably, Ireland?
They're 100% accurate, totally correct, all the time, without a doubt. Um, no, we're all laughing because we all know the answer. Generally speaking, if they say they're Irish, they're probably Irish. If they say they're Germanic, they're probably Germanic. Now, getting into the nitty gritty of principalities and duchies and things like that's kind of a whole separate issue. The other thing you do want to keep in mind with any census, particularly those that are giving the birthplace, we don't necessarily know, except for 1940, who provided the information on that census. And a child, especially if their parent grew up in the United States but was born across the pond, that was well before the child. If the child's giving the information, they might just remember what Pa or Ma told them or what they thought was correct, and that might not have been 100% correct. But it's a
Yep.
starting point.
Okay, so after step one, step two would be to extract all ages, times, and years from documents. So are you talking about what you already have on hand?
Well, either way. Go ahead, Michael.
I was going to say the one step we're kind of leaving out here is actually finding the document, which is kind of not what our focus is not finding the document, but you're going to have to find the document, determine where they may be naturalized, and search those records. So we're kind of supposing that you have done that. Um, and then you're going to take the information from the document, and the more recent the document, we'll see some from a variety of time periods, the more detail that is in that record.
Right. The other thing we're kind of skipping is the fact that this was for most people a two-step process, where they had to file a declaration of intent, and wait a certain amount of time after they got off the boat to do that, and then wait a further amount of time before they could do the final papers, or the have the petition for naturalization. So usually, and the two documents could be filed with different courts, different places, and they have generally have different information. So I found in the 19th century where, by and large, uh, the naturalizations are not as detailed, but the first papers, that Declaration of Intent, a lot of times gives the ship, gives the arrival date, things that then the petition for naturalization does not. So you should always be looking for two documents, or if you haven't found two documents, you're not done searching.
Love that. All right. You guys have tons of documents. I can't wait to show them. Step 3 is to research the naturalized person. So, where are we? Are we researching them in America? Are we researching them in the
Well, you should
country?
start. You should start in the United States and do kind of work from their death back to their arrival, and then see what that tells you to give you clues to make a better, more accurate, hopefully more successful search when you do go across the pond. But what you might find when you research them more fully is some of the details in the naturalization or in the first papers of declaration of intent might not be 100% accurate. Now, of course, the more recent the naturalization, the more likely they had to rely on passenger lists and other things to back up what they were stating. But if we're talking
Are you
19th century,
calling the ancestors liars? I thought they filled this out.
well, I'm going to give you this question to answer that. If you have never told a lie, then your ancestor maybe has never told a lie. So I'm just going to let you go with that. We're going to let that rest right there. Um, sometimes the person might have, tweaked things off by a year or whatever. And the thing is, in a lot of these things in the 19th century, they're just walking in, maybe with some witnesses, and saying, "I've been here 5 years or 2 years," whatever the requirement period was for what document they were filing, and no one ever said, "Prove it." There might be some witnesses, but if it's their first cousin and their neighbor they've known forever, that's just something to keep in mind. Some were very conscientious about being accurate, some were not. Just like people that make the trees on Family Search and Ancestry, the accuracy varies from one person to
What? Those trees aren't
that's another
100%
story.
accurate?
And if Jim doesn't have anything else to add before we get onto that, we're going to go on to step 4.
All right, step 4 is to learn about location where allegiance was renounced. Okay, so now we're going across the pond.
Well, we're not actually going across the pond. We're learning about it remotely, is
Okay.
the way I would put it. And this has bearing, because they usually, since just about all the places they were coming from had some sort of monarch or whatever. A lot of times they say they're not saying they're renouncing the allegiance to a nation. They're saying they're renouncing it to a particular person. And and so now in 19th century, Britain, it's pretty easy because the whole stinking British Isles, England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, they're all under Queen Victoria for most of the 19th century. But when you get to the German states, there it's very sticky. Prussia was a lot of Germany, so they went through a series of Frederick Williams, and then finally Williams, just plain Williams, and then you have all the little piddly states like Bavaria and Hessen and Baden and Württemberg, where they would have their Grand Duke or King or Elector or whatever. And this, I think, where we're getting with this to, in part, is if you don't have a village of origin, having this uh, uh, personage that they renounced from may take this down to a smaller area.
Nice. All right. Step 5 is then to determine eligibility to naturalize at the time. So this is where the sticky, tricky part comes in. Can you explain this?
No, but Rich Venezia could. So
Well, that because the thing is, especially we get in the late 19th century, early 20th century, certain ethnic groups and people from certain areas of the world could not naturalize at all. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind, and but you want to look at contemporary. There's the I'm gonna butcher the name, but there's websites from the National Archives and whatnot that would help you to locate some of those laws. You could do some Google searches and find some things out to determine what the time period was for the waiting periods and things like that, ages, um, to do things so that you're aware of those things.
So there was a time when like women didn't have to naturalize, right? They would naturalize with their husband, and I guess minors might have something
Well,
similar.
and in many of those, if it's early enough, those people will not even be listed because it's the man would naturalize, and then just by default, his wife and any children under the age of 21 would naturalize, and a woman would have no reason to naturalize usually because they can't do this
She
thing
couldn't
called
vote.
vote. And there were a few, without getting too far afield, who would naturalize because they wanted a homestead. Because if you wanted a homestead under the Act of 1862, if I'm remembering it correctly, you had to be a naturalized citizen. And some immigrant females did want to get a homestead, so they would have to naturalize to do that.
Okay. And in step 6, create a timeline, chronology based on the documents and the laws. So let's take a look at some of these fantastic documents you have here.
well, this is my ancestor Heinrich Hiller, who is my only 19th century immigrant. All the rest of mine are colonial times. And so we have his naturalization in Berks County. He came in through Port of Baltimore. And this document here says he's renouncing. If you go to the next slide, he's renouncing, well, I think you go to the next slide. He's renouncing his allegiance. No, I was wrong. To the King of Württemberg. And Württemberg is a southwestern German state. And this, narrowed down where his origin would be from.
Nice.
And then the what I'm showing here is on the second page of his naturalization. If we go to the details slide, it says exactly when he came into Baltimore,
Oh,
and it gives his autograph. It gives his signature. Which is, I don't know, especially in the pre photography era. A signature or a tombstone are the closest artifacts that I feel are closest to photos.
look at those H's.
Yeah,
They look like Z's.
that's a typical German script H. Yeah.
All right.
And then the final one, this is interesting to me, and I'll admit I haven't researched it. I gotta figure it out. But this is the final page, and this is where they typically had two people stand up to say, "Yep, he is who he is," and all that. And if we go to the detail slide, you see that the two original names are scratched out, and it's two other dudes in there who are signing their names. So I don't know if his witnesses didn't show, or I don't think those are. No, they're not the same name. So I don't know. I'd like to see if I could find out any background on that.
You know, one
If they
thought
were your, go ahead.
one thought on the top of my head was they might not have been naturalized themselves. 'Cause they'd have to
I think
be.
they got mad at each other at the pub and
Well, that
didn't
that
try to
could be a
make
little
them
too much.
stand
They
up
had a little
for
too
'em.
much lager the night before and changed their
The-
mind.
those two guys went to the pokey, and then we had to get these other guys quick. Hey, say you know Heinrich. He needs to be naturalized today.
I love this.
This
What do
is
we
this
have
is one of
here?
mine. This is the title that we've got up here. I didn't catch this when I looked at the slides, but the title is a tad bit off. This is actually a minor's naturalization, not a minor's petition. It's his petition. It's a minor's naturalization. This kind of ties into the two-step process we talked about earlier, where there was a declaration of intent, and then after a certain amount of time had passed, there was the petition to actually naturalize. If you emigrated as a minor and then wanted to naturalize for a long time in the 19th century, there was a slightly different process because you couldn't make your declaration because you weren't 21 years of age, and someone under 21 couldn't file a declaration because they weren't of the age of majority. And so that's Folky here, who's naturalized in 1879. I know he arrived when he was 16. This is when he's about 22, if memory serves, and he had been here. He's 16. He's the 2 years he's been here, that comes up, but he can't file a declaration because he's not of the age of majority. So when he turned 21, his process was a minor's petition. You're doing that all on the same day. You're saying, I want to be a citizen. That's what he's saying here. And if we bibbity bop to the next one, I think this should
Bibbity
be
bop.
bibbity bop, then these are his witnesses. And the one thing I know about this, because they're witnessing, is they're immigrants. One is his cousin, one is not. They had to have been citizens.
Okay.
And what's really cool about this one is he went 80 miles to naturalize. In the first page we've already gone past, it says he lived in Illinois for, I think, a year, US for 5, but it doesn't say what county he lived in. These two guys, it says they're residents of Knox, where the county where the naturalization took place, but Folky's residence is not mentioned. It turns out that's not where he was living, but his witnesses lived there, and that's, I'm assuming, why he went there to naturalize. But one was his cousin, one was a fellow immigrant. All three of them ended up out in Nebraska homesteading a few years after this document. What's interesting about Folky is he went back to Germany. He's on a manifest about not even a year after this naturalization. He's coming back to the U.S. And what I'm thinking he did, he was in Prussia. My thought is he was concerned about the Prussian army and maybe being drafted while he was over there. And so before he went back to visit mom and pa or whoever, he naturalized before he went, because he did go back relatively soon after this for a short
So I
time.
didn't ask you a big question like, where do you get these types of documents? Where are you looking for these naturalizations?
Before 1906, any court of record could naturalize. Typically, it's a local county court for most people that have rural people. Once in a while, in a city or a metropolitan area, you might have one or two courts that actually perform naturalizations. But before 1906, any court of record could naturalize. After that, then the federal government took over the process, and things were significantly different after that. There's more
What happened in
detailed documents after that.
1956? Is 1956 a key date for a change within that as well?
I'm not sure about 56. I know in 1922 the women's citizenship became separated from their husbands, and that opened up a whole nother
Fantastic.
thing. This is the bottom where he's actually just signing off on his naturalization. At that point, he is a citizen. I think we've got one more. Do we have one more? When I saw Jim's Heinrich Hiller, I looked at it real fast and I thought, that is not the one I submitted. I did. Why is this not my? This is he signed a butchered form of Heinrich Mueller. And when they
Oh.
he signs he's probably 60ish 70ish when he does this. They anglicized his name after the I there, you can see, but he's signing Mueller and it's closer to Heinrich. Looks like Henny, but I don't think he signed Henny. Um, but he is indicating the King of Prussia,
Prussia.
where he owed the allegiance to, and this is his. This is not his naturalization, like it says in the overhead or the title. This is his declaration uh, of intent. So that would help me get a ballpark of when he came here. Potentially, most people did that relatively soon. He could have been here much longer, but most people did that within a couple. I think 2 years was the time frame. Most people did that relatively soon to get the process started, so that they could complete the process as soon as they were legally able to do that. But the signatures are neat when there are signatures on those documents. Interestingly enough, for Heinrich, I never found his actual naturalization. I just found the declaration
Oh.
of intention. So for whatever, I think they're pretty much extant in the two counties where he lived off and on. So for whatever reason, he chose not to complete the process.
Oh, wow. I think you have one more.
This one's, yeah, I think there's actually maybe two more. This one's from from 1934. This is for a Greek immigrant to Chicago, and this is during that time period where they would have to have the passenger manifest check. He came through Ellis Island to back up what they were making claims on their petition to naturalize and on their declaration of intent. So this is a certificate of arrival. The U.S. Department of Labor at the time looked at the records and then certified his name appeared arriving in New York on that ship in 1914 under that name. And if we bip to the next one, I think there should be the rest of his
I want a
record
bebop.
there. Bebop, you can do that. That'll work.
Okay.
This is his actual declaration of intent. He signed it. There's some details there. He gives his address in Chicago in 1930, 1920, I guess was the declaration of intent. He indicates where he's born in Greece. It mentions his wife Mary, doesn't mention any children, which was key for this individual because it turns out he wasn't the parent of the children that he supposedly was, but they are not mentioned. But the wife Mary is mentioned here.
Oh, wow. So that's kind of a clue that they are not his children.
That was
Interesting.
right, because they usually would have mentioned their children. It's also a clue that he wasn't divorced from her in 1928. They waited a while to do that too. That's a separate issue. Did we have any more? There we go. This is his actual petition for citizenship, and the residence has changed. So he's moved in the time period between the declaration and this petition for citizenship, because now it's on South Halsted in Chicago. Repeat some of the information that's on the other document. He's giving up allegiance to the Greek Republic there. And this one I don't think has the names of, and it mentions Mary again. It gives their date and place of marriage. So if I didn't have that, that information is on his petition
Nice.
for citizenship. They got married in Chicago in 1922, if I didn't already have
Nice.
that. And there may be witnesses on the next one here. I'm trying to watch our time and get through every. Yeah, here's the two dudes that were his witnesses. One was a waiter, one was a clerk. These are two other Greek immigrants. They're not relatives as far as I know, but if I plotted out these addresses, they're all living in the same close proximity to each other. The Greek neighborhood of that part of Chicago is where they were living at that point in.
You're making me hungry.
And
Chicago is a town to eat through.
It is. It is.
Fantastic, Michael. Thank you for those. So it seems like it's a two-step process. I mean, you want to try to find the intent and the actual naturalization. They could be at multiple court levels, but Family Search and Ancestry are key places. Do they have these records there?
That'd be the place to start. and then go from
All
there if you
right.
need to.
Let's go through our steps for citizenship naturally. Step 1, determine the ancestor who naturalized. Step 2, extract all ages, times, and years from the document. Step 3, research the person's naturalized. Step 4, learn about the location where the allegiance was renounced. Step 5, determine eligibility to naturalize at the time. And step 6, create a timeline, chronology based on the document and laws. Thank you so much. All right, let's get ready for our special guests. Tons of documents they have, tons. Okay, welcome back to our second quick start. I'm so excited to learn about World War I and World War II and the unique records that they have, because I'm trying to research some 688 folks and, Montford Point folks. And so I am going to try not to go over time. I am very honored to have back two special guests with us. First, Annette Unrau. Hello, Nettie. I didn't know you were called Nettie. I'm
Yeah.
calling you Nettie from now on. And then we have Michael Strauss with us as well. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. We are going to just get started with your quick start because you have lots of documents and I want to make sure we have time to go through all of them. And so these two join us today for a quick start on unique collections for World War I and World War II. So, you ready to get started?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. So step 1 would be to interview a veteran if you can, if they're still here. Annette, you talked about a great project at the location where you are, where they did some interviews of veterans. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, if I didn't have like my eyeballs coming in from that light. So the project that we're working on, or that was worked on, there was an intern at Weber State University in the Stewart Library Special Collections Archives, where she actually got an internship to go to the Hill Aerospace Museum and interview the veterans there that have worked on the aircraft from Hill Air Force Base. And I think they collected about 90% of those stories and interviews and information that is quite phenomenal. A lot of those volunteers and veterans also volunteer at the Aerospace Museum and lead guests through tours there.
That's amazing. So, so not only would you interview them if they're still here, you want to search to see if someone else has interviewed them, get those oral histories. I love that.
Yeah.
So that's step 1. And that's what a blessing to have them there volunteering. I know that's got to be fantastic, having those firsthand accounts just kind of walking around.
Well,
and
I
you
think
can ask them.
Their oldest volunteers is 99. Yeah.
What a
and
blessing.
then I walked in and said, "Hey, what do you have to do to volunteer here?" The one that interviewed me was 82, and he says, "But that one over there is 89, and he's smarter."
All right. So after you find interviews or do your interviews, step 2 would be to find service record. Michael, how on earth do we find these service records?
Well, certainly the records are available, and less the fire that occurred in 1973. And we'll just talk briefly about that as well. A couple of some of that information is on the slides. If you wanted to share that, Camille.
Yes. If we could talk through it, and then we can go through all the slides at the end, if that's okay. If it's
That's
not,
totally fine. Totally fine. Okay. Yes. So really the records for the 20th century are held in the custody of the National Personnel Record Center at St. Louis. It's part of the National Archives, their system. And those records for all the military branches are kept there. But you need to be aware of the fire that occurred on July 12th of 1973, as that destroyed a number of those military records.
Fantastic. So you need like a researcher to actually get those records. That's not a, is that a place that we can go to?
Oh, absolutely. You can access those records one of three basic ways. The first of which is to visit the room yourself. So you just don't show up. You have to have an appointment. So they need to know you're coming. And that's been in place for many years. The second is to employ an independent researcher. So the archive will provide you a list of qualified researchers, and you can reach out and make whatever arrangements you have to with that individual. And the third and final way, which is the one I would probably recommend least, only because it takes longer. I mean, time obviously is a constraint issue. You can request it through writing. You fill out
Oh.
a standard form. It's Form 180. It's online. It's completely a PDF file that you can fill out and send in, and they will respond. But just know that it's at the speed of our federal government. So just being truthful.
Love the truth. It really works. All right. So we're going to find those general service records. Step 3 would be to look for unique collections. And so where are we finding these unique collections, and what types of collections might they be? We have tons of documents to show you. I will show you that in a second.
Yes. So those unique collections can take a lot of forms. Because of the fire, it becomes necessary for a genealogist or an historian, anyone interested in researching, it's going to become necessary for them to seek out alternative sources. I mean, you have to think outside the box, more or less. And a couple of suggestions that I had made was, one, you could search for records related directly to the Library of Congress, because they contain an awful lot of military records. And one in particular that was a really exciting, unique collection are the World War I era propaganda images. Those are amazing. If you have not looked at them, they really are worth the time, because not only do they cover what's happening socially here in the United States and in Canada for that matter, it also really talks about all the military branches, because there are recruiting posters for each, and each of the service branches have their own posters for that time. So it is a really nice opportunity to see a unique set of records. That's the first. There are others. I would also recommend highly that you consider looking at registrations of enemy aliens. These are really unique because they occurred not only during the 20th century, but certainly they occurred earlier during the period of the War of 1812. There were several enemy alien acts passed prior to our entry into that war, and these laws were discontinued and more modernized for the 20th century. So these records of alien enemies are...
What's an enemy alien, Michael?
Someone who is likely not naturalized, a national, someone who has never naturalized. So it dovetails nicely into Jim and Michael's topic as well, because you will find records of those that our government deemed enemies of the state. And it would oftentimes come with their photographs, their fingerprints, even more detailed information that you might find on a naturalization, a typical naturalization. So that's another one. I have two others that I could share quickly. Morning reports are, again, a unique set of records that I think any genealogist should, if you're not using them, you should be. Because morning reports are giving you the day-to-day activity of the United States Army and the Army Air Corps before it separates as part of the Air Force separate in 1947. There are archival, there are non-archival records. The slide goes over that breakdown in the period of time. And those records are what are commonly referred to as an exception-based report, meaning simple. Yeah, so an exception-based report is a report or a document where you only appear in the record if something happened to you personally. I mean, your unit is there. You have to know the unit. But if you are transferred, if you're promoted, you're demoted, you're wounded, you're captured, something happened to you as the soldier personally, you're listed with your name, your rank, your service number. These show up in the records for the morning reports, making them, another unique set of records. And then the last that I thought would be, really a really good example of a unique record, are a record that relates directly to the information that is held at the Hill Air Force Base where Annette works, the missing aircrew reports. Now, these are strictly for World War II, but these records are, again, a unique set of records, and they focus on those crew members that flew in planes that were downed by the enemy. Now, maybe someone survived and was captured, but it also records those that were killed as a result of those aircraft accidents. Some were accidents, some were obviously in action, military action, but in turn, they record the information of the crew members, their rank, their positions on the plane, their service number. All of that information is provided along with detailed information on where the event occurred, where the plane went down. And oftentimes it records the next of kin. And
wow, really?
Yeah. And an
Genealogy
example of that
information
as well
on
I
there.
have. So those were the four that I thought of were immediately that came to my mind that were unique records that you can use to reconstruct what was lost.
Love that. Annette, did you want to talk about your unique records? Or
Yeah.
because I'm going to, if you want to wait until we show them, that's fine.
Well, I'm freaking out just a little bit because I'm worried.
Don't freak out, Annette. Let's go on to step 4. We'll talk
look,
about
it's giving me a
show.
touch up my appearance option. Okay, so I'm looking for the share.
Annette, what I would like for you to do is tell us about step 4, which was to colorize pictures. How do you do that?
Well, that was a fun one. So I couldn't exactly access the record I wanted to look at for my children's grand uncle's cousin. And I found this fantastic picture. I sent it over to Michael to look at because I had some questions about it. Michael, did you get it colorized for me? Did you find? So I found it colorized in that I went to My Heritage where My Heritage has an option that allows you to colorize and update the photo. But then when I scanned it and sent it off I texted it and then I sent it off to Michael, it didn't come out as clean. And so we kind of opted for the black and white image, found it was better in its resolution. But My Heritage was the place to go to colorize images. And then you could probably run it through one of your apps on your computer to upgrade it and update it and make it better.
Fantastic. And then step 5 is to tell the story. Like, we can't do all this work without sharing. So let's look at your treasure trove of documents here. So Michael.
Yes. So what you're looking at there is is a photograph of the entry to the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. So the address is on the upper left. And again, just to recap, those were the 3 ways in which any patron can then access those records. I did want to point out at the very bottom of the slide there that military records prior to World War I are going to be housed at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. So the main archives office in downtown Washington at 7th and Pennsylvania Avenue.
All right.
So this slide is really, looks like it got a little wonky on us there. So this slide is really telling, I think, as this really tells us about the depth of the fire. So the fire that occurred on July 12th had a disastrous effect on Army personnel records. So the Army personnel records for anyone who was discharged between 1912 and 1960, so those accounted for 80% of those records were either lost or destroyed in some fashion, damaged. So think about that. That's World War I, World War II, Korea, and leading into the years up to Vietnam, and including the punitive expedition of 1916, which precedes our entry into World War I. Air Force personnel discharged between 1947 and 1964. That affected about 75% of the records. However, it only started alphabetically with the name of James Hubbard. So they know a specific place where the record loss began. The date 1947 is not by happenstance. That is the date and the year that the Air Force is created as a separate military branch outside of the United States Army. The
Okay.
fire did not affect the Coast Guard, the Marine Corps, or the Navy records. They are fully intact. The only other thing you really need to know about the service records that are important is the military service files operate under what's called the 62-year law. So
Okay.
today's date, January 21st,
Mhm.
62 years ago, so 1963, anyone discharged or separated before that date is considered public record. So anyone
Okay.
separated before January 21st, 1963, and it's a rolling date. So that date changes tomorrow to January 22nd, 1963. So just be aware of that one caveat that the archives has in place.
Fantastic. This
I
is the
think,
fire.
oh, I know. And I think very few people get to see the effects of the fire, the aftermath, really, if you will. I mean, it was a major disaster, and these records and these images come directly from the National Archives. Obviously, it was taken, in the days following the fire. They never did figure out what the origin of the fire was. I mean, they investigated, but never did figure out what caused it. And it took about 4 days to bring it under control. So it was really
4 days.
That's how long it took to bring it under control. So again, they don't know the cause, but what they do know was the effect. And you're looking
There's no
at
conspiracy theory, Michael.
Pardon me? Conspiracy theory? Is
There's
that
no
what you said?
conspiracy theory about
I don't
why-
want to subscribe to that.
Okay.
Because then I got to start talking about John F. Kennedy and some other things that I think would be a little uncomfortable.
Might be a UFO involved.
No,
Okay.
no UFO. Now you're really going way out there. Now, the example of this record with the image of the soldier taken in uniform while he was in camp is actually one of my favorites. This is Gandolfo Scarnisi. I'm not related to him. However, I do own his uniform. So I have his original uniform that he wore in France. And his record was lost in the fire. So his entire service file was completely destroyed in the fire. But because there are records that you can go to as a result of that, so some of these unique records, in addition to those reconstructed records, so there are 3 types. There are the burnt files. So these are files that actually did survive, but were burned, but did survive. So the archives has those. There are reconstructed files. These were files that they asked veterans after the fire in 1973 to obtain copies of their discharges, not a lot, just a handful of pages, and submit them. So these are so they have them as well. And the third, which is displayed on this screen, is the auxiliary file. If no reconstructed file exists, no burnt file exists, no original service file exists, you will not walk out of the archives empty-handed, because all of the final payroll records, the auxiliary file, have survived. Okay. So you will walk out with something. You will walk out with something for your ancestor. So that's an important takeaway.
So, Michael, the uniform is not the same one that I tried on at the Airspace Museum, is it?
No, this is Army.
This is infantry, right?
Yes, this is infantry. You tried on one that was in the Air Service.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So I did not think about Library of Congress, but when you think about propaganda, most definitely. Oh, look at these.
Yeah, I actually own this original. This is mine. And this is a glass plate negative. So this is 8.5 by 11.
Beautiful.
It's a glass negative. And it was taken in New York City. I'm trying to remember exactly where it was taken. It was taken at 59th and Broadway near the subway station in Manhattan. And you can see 2 women that are working there. They're probably civilian government employees, and they are using glue to glue up a number of propaganda posters, which are 7 of them there are pictured. These are just 2 random propaganda images that I just picked out for our quick start tonight. The one on the left.
Did they have? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
The one on the left.
Yes. Yeah. The one on the left is actually Canadian. So it's not United States. And it's important because it included a lot of Americans. We entered the war on April 6th, 1917. However, Canada entered the war on August 5th, 1914, 3 years before us. And Canada entered one day after England entered the war. And because of that, Canada tried real hard to recruit Americans to cross the border and fight for the Canadian Expeditionary Force. This poster essentially is telling us 500 men wanted for the 237th Battalion of the Canadian Expeditionary Force, which was part of 5 Canadian Infantry Battalion regiments that made up and constituted an organization called the American Legion. Now, they could put the posters at the border, but certainly couldn't cross into the United States. Clearly, that was not something they could do. But a number of thousands of Americans did cross the border and did join the CE.
Interesting. Don't forget to look in Canada. I love
Absolutely.
that.
There are thousands of records of Americans, and those service files never experienced a fire. And they're available on Fold 3 and on Ancestry. So you can.
And this one on the right is saying, hey, you're going to be so cool. Your woman and your dog are going to look up to you.
Well, that's one interpretation of it, I suppose. Yes, it's titled Duty Calls, and it's a print by Edward Wrench, who did a dual print, one with an African-American soldier. And the African-American print was titled Colored Men is No Slacker. And this was taken at the time, this was drawn at the time that we entered the war in April of 1917. Remember, we're drafting men for the first time nationally in the 20th century. It's the selective service. It's not the draft of the Civil War. It's very different. It looks very different. So these two were done up in just for that reason.
Fantastic. Love them. Okay, now we're on to another unique record.
The registration of enemy aliens. So there's just some basic background which I did share, and I just recapping that the act passed on April 6th. The act that was passed followed our entry into World War I. It was to focused on non-naturalized or enemy aliens by definition, and they had to register as a national security measure due to the presidential proclamation issued by President Woodrow Wilson. And this is just a page from that proclamation, which you can readily read online. However, I do have a really awesome example. This is actually one of my favorites. I just love this image. And so this image here, and I think you'll appreciate this, Shamil. This is an image for a man by the name of Albert Sockland. Sockland was a immigrant, had immigrated from Germany, was born in Dusseldorf in 1845, and in turn came to the United States to settle. However, during his lifetime, he never chose to naturalize as a U.S. citizen, and that's fine. He didn't have to. So, I mean, nothing was to force him to do that. And interestingly, at the time of the war, because he was a non-naturalized national, he was deemed by our government to be an enemy alien, and he required a photograph. What I'm looking at here is probably the outfit he chose to wear when he had his picture taken was not by happenstance. He chose to wear his old Civil War uniform and uniform to show the federal government that you have picked on the wrong guy. I am not an enemy of the state. Forget the fact that I didn't naturalize, but I'm still not an enemy of the state. And therefore, I shouldn't be treated this way. I mean, that's probably the thought that I'm thinking is going through his mind. And you can see him pictured there in his mothballs and all, his uniform. Interestingly, he shows up on the picture with the rank of a sergeant. So you can see the sergeant in his sleeve. However, he never got above the rank of private.
Okay.
So that I can't quite figure out. But he died 2 years later and was buried with full military honors at Leavenworth National Cemetery. And again,
I love that,
man,
Michael.
2 years earlier was an enemy alien.
I
So
love
go figure that one out.
That
The last couple that we're going to discuss here are the missing aircrew reports. These are great, as I had alluded to. So the image you see here, which is on Fold 3, is the crew of a B-24D bomber, a Liberator bomber, named the Beautiful Betsy. This picture was taken in Australia just a year before the war ends in 1944. Each of the crew members is identified. What's fascinating is this image does not match, name-wise, does not match up with the picture or the document, which is in the next slide, which shares the missing aircrew report for this same bomber that went down in Beidler in Australia. So you can see the list of all the crew members. They're listed there with their names, their ranks, their crew positions, their service numbers, in addition to 2 RAF officers that were flying on board the plane when it went down. All the men were killed. On the right, you have a list of names of the crew members that were killed. And on the second column on that same page are the names and relationships of each and every one of those crew members next of kin. So it contains so much useful family history information. But the thing I really wanted to point out about this document, when you put it together with the image in the previous slide, it doesn't necessarily mean that the crew you have a photograph of is going to be the same crew that went down with the plane a year later in 1945. These crew members changed planes quite frequently. Men were moved from squadron to squadron or group to group, and it was not uncommon to have a whole new entire crew placed on an aircraft for a specific mission. So just
thank you for that. I thought we were looking at a picture full of dead men. I was getting sad.
No, not quite. So those men had survived. The last record that we talked about for unique records, at least that I spoke about, were the morning reports. So you can see the years that cover the Army, which included the Army Air Corps. So this is obviously before 1947. And those Army records up through 1980. So the Army, the records at the Personnel Records Center are considered non-archival from 1960 to 1980. So you can see them, but you can see a limited amount of information. Prior to that, 1959 and earlier, back to 1912, those records are fully available. There's no restriction to those records. They will never, and they do not accept written requests. So you have to get someone to do it for you, or you have to do it for yourself. So this is not something you can fill the standard form out for. This is something you have to make the pilgrimage and do it yourself. And you must know the name of the military unit.
Okay, okay. Because I want to see all the morning reports for the 6888.
I'm sorry, repeat that?
I want to see all of the morning reports for the 6888.
Yeah, and you would be able to get access to those records at the Personnel Records Center just by simply putting in your request for those records from that unit.
I think you have another one. Is this one yours?
Yeah, that's one's mine as well. That's the last one of mine. So I did want to share an example of a morning report and one that covered the air service. So specifically to the air service, as Annette's here and she works at Hill, I thought she would appreciate this one, as this is the uniform that I brought up there to show their staff. And I went to the back offices. I'm sorry, Annette, I'm going to put you under the bus here.
That's fine. I was wearing my riding boots that day.
Well, I didn't expect her. I walked away from my uniform. She said, "I'm just going to look at the uniform." I didn't expect her to actually put the uniform on. And it fit her pretty darn good. There was no chance at all that it was going to fit. And I have the original. So this is the original uniform from the front view. You can see it doesn't look much different than the Army's uniform. So again, it was part of the Army, but it was the air service. And the color devices, which you can see circular color devices on each color, indicate that it was part of the air service. And this man, Arthur Coe, who served with that service in World War I, was in the 186th Aero Squadron. And the morning reports are on fold 3, covering all the Aero Squadrons, all the infantry regiments, all the engineering regiments, all the Pioneer Corps regiments, breaking down all of the military units that served during the First World War. You're just seeing here a typical page listing the date, the month of 1918. It's April of 1918. And if you look at the bottom part of that slide, you can see where it tells us that the unit moved from France and was transferred to Germany to the Trier Airdrome. So they moved.
All righty.
You can follow the movement of the unit,
Yes.
in addition to looking for the men in the unit and details about the men that were transferred, wounded, killed, missing in action, whatever had occurred to them.
Fantastic. Thank you
What a
for that. Annette, we have a very short amount of time. I'm actually going to go over by 2 minutes for my show to get your stuff in. So talk to us about this, what you have here, Fold 3.
So this is basically the Fold 3 kiosk access page. This is what I'm working on at the Hill Aerospace Museum, where I'm creating educational material for adult programming, for a sustainable program for the volunteers to teach other volunteers, to teach guests when they come to the library. What I noticed on this one, we're still working on getting an affiliate with Ancestry and then Family Search as well, and maybe My Heritage. But with this one, I can actually go and search for local records for Utah Air Force soldiers, and it's really, really cool. It takes a little bit of practice. This right here is the collection at Ancestry for the Red Cross nurses. It actually covers World War I and World War II. I really loved this. I kind of snibbled it up a little bit because I wanted to show different pieces of information. This woman had actually been on a Navy boat during World War II and was torpedoed, but apparently she came out of it, recovered nicely, and started a newspaper. But she had one little issue. She was, but did not plan her work very well. So I kind of relate to her. But I just loved her. And then let's go to the next slide. This collection really is amazing because you can find lots of things. This is the Library of Congress, the research guides. I focused on the Red Cross nurses.
Yeah.
I like what Michael said earlier about the propaganda images. They're fantastic. There are newspapers there. I even had another slide where I just found all sorts of stuff and I'm creating a handout for it. But I really wanted to focus on, in the top right quadrant, you see search this guide, be creative in the terminology you use to search. On the left-hand bottom quadrant, ask a librarian. You have access to an archival librarian that will help you find stuff. And then down at the bottom, I highlighted go back, highlighted in blue, you can see quick links that will give you subjects that you can go look up and search by. So be creative again with those search subjects. Now we can go to the next slide. This right here is part of the Grande Guerre or World War I Red Cross prisoner of war internment camps. I included it because I wanted you to see where all of the POW camps were during World War I. The Red Cross was involved with sending nurses, and these nurses also came from Canada and from the United States. Many of these women before 1920 could not practice as doctors, or they had PhDs. They had learned what they needed to learn to become a doctor, but because they couldn't vote yet, they also couldn't serve at that capacity and work in that realm. So they decided to sign up for the acting arm of the military, the Army, and become part of the Red Cross. And they were all over. They were mostly on the Western Front, less so on the Eastern Front, but you can see this map that lists all the numbers of camps.
So nice.
And in this, you can search by all of the countries involved with World War I. You can search by military and civilian, and you get these postcards. Go to the next one. And this is, again, snibbled up because I found like 4 or 5 different cards for one person. They think there are about 5 million postcards or little index cards in there. And what you're seeing is that this man, Joseph Michael Levine, it was from the United States. There's a reference number. I couldn't find it on the first sheet, so I was nice enough to go and find another sheet. There were 2 reference numbers at the bottom. You can see in the bottom, there's a little red square with an arrow pointing to it.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually transferred with an entire group of men. None of them were wounded, and they were all sent to the Ukraine, which you can see on the top right, Gefangenenlisten, where we see information, and then you can see another piece of information that I snibbled that was further down off and shows the name of his father, where he's from, what his birth year is. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you can actually find postcards, and then you can find information about the internment camps, because the nurses would actually go to these internment camps, document the information, and send home that information so that people could find their loved ones and find out what had happened to them. Next.
Where are these at, Annette?
These are on the Grand Guerre. This is on Ancestry. No, wait, this is
Okay.
Grand Guerre Red Cross. It's the International Red Cross Grand Guerre World War I site. It's a little bit difficult to use. I highly recommend that you read through and scroll through it so you can look at what it tells you to do. It's a little tricky, and as you can see, there was a lot of information on each one of
Yeah.
the slides. So you really have to like create a timeline so you know what you're looking at, and you can figure out what are the record collections, and are they on Library of Congress, are they on Ancestry, Family Search, MyHeritage, NARA, wherever to find them.
Fantastic. Hate to rush you guys, but I had to. Let's go through these steps for unique collections for World War I and World War II. Step 1 is to find the interview or interview a veteran. Step 2 is to find the service records. Step 3 is to look for unique collections. Step 4 is to colorize it if you can using MyHeritage. And step 5 is to tell the story. Annette, Michael, it was an honor to have you on today. I'm just putting Jim up here because he's not there. Thank you.
Quick appearance. I'm here.
Thank you so much for being here. I am honored. Thank you.